I am a senior lecturer in the psychology and counseling department here at Tennessee Tech. I teach introduction to psychology. I also teach group psychology, and I teach developmental. At one time, I worked at Vanderbilt at the Child Development Center, and I also do a podcast about psychology and how it affects you in your normal life. And so I'm really glad to have you all here today. Now, before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and answer some questions that you may have, okay? And I think the first question is, okay, Doug, why is it that this thing is called MAD Topics? I mean, we're here to talk about anxiety and depression. Well, just to give you a little bit of background, the name MAD was chosen on purpose. And all through history and back a while back, we noticed that when people weren't behaving right or doing right, we just called them mad and kind of pushed them into the fringes. Well, we decided to take that name not to create a stigma, but more to reclaim it, okay? To kind of bring it more out into the light, and that's the purpose for this, is that we want you to understand and bring more of the concepts and ideals out into the light, because the more you know, the better it is. And we want you to know that this is a safe space. We're going to talk about some serious topics, but we're going to talk about them in a very honest way and without shame. Speaking of topics today, as you know, we're going to be talking about anxiety and depression. We're going to talk about it not only just from the clinical side, but we're going to talk about how it looks in the classroom, also how it looks in our community, and also how it looks in our personal lives. Just to give you an overarching definition, anxiety is more than just nerves. Everybody goes, well, that makes you're afraid, different things like that, but it's usually an overwhelming fear or anxiety. And it doesn't go along with the situation. And it can deeply affect us in many ways, from the way we think, the way we feel, and also the way we function. Depression is a mood disorder in which is characterized by persistent sadness, hopelessness, and a loss of interest in things that once brought joy. It impacts everything, from sleep to appetite to focus to relationships. We will also not shy away from some of the more heavy subjects too that goes along with depression. We will also talk about suicide and suicidal ideations and what you can do if someone mentions that in your life and what happens and what's going on. So we're going to talk about a lot of subjects because we're a firm believer that the more we know, the more knowledge we have. So whether you're a student, a professional, a parent, a spouse, a caregiver, or someone who has lived this experience now, we'd like to say that we're glad that you're here and that we hope that you learn and reflect and grow with us as we go through this journey. Now, before we start all this topic, before we start talking about research and all this data and stuff, I want you to take a couple of minutes out and think about this. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you've sat and you feel overwhelmed? I mean, just really overwhelmed. Whether it's in a classroom and you're so stressed out in your mind, you're like, I can't focus, I can't do anything. That's what we're here to look at and kind of talk about. And if you never have felt that, I can pretty much guarantee you someone sitting near you, or maybe someone in your family has felt that way. And these are really important subjects, and it allows us to reach out and offer that support. And that's the best thing in the world. And that's kind of the whole intent here today, is to give you knowledge, information, and support on this journey. Now, let me go ahead. I want to introduce the panel here first. I'm just going to ask them to raise their hands as I call them out. First, we have Ben Kraft. Then we have Dr. Todd Schultz. And then we have Miss Katie Mixon. And on the end, we have Dr. Derek Edwards. Now, before I go on, it takes a village to get something like this to go, okay? And there's a couple people that I want to give a shout out and special thanks to. If they're here, please stand up so they can see you. I see you looking at me mean already. I would like to say a special thanks to our project coordinator, Lydia Schultz. Lydia is being helped also with a partner coordinator of McLean Oakley. I don't think McLean's in here. She is in a colorful dress. She's outside making sure everything works out. Also, I want you to take a moment and look around. We have a ton of MAD scholars. These are undergraduates, master's levels, and PhD students. They're here today to make everything work, to help you. If you need anything, they are here, so give them a holler. Finally, I want to take a moment of a little bit about love and recognition for someone who is basically the spark behind all this madness, and that would be you, Dr. Kinsey Simone. In case you don't know, I told Dr. Simone that she would not have to speak because we only have 2 hours. But let me just tell you a little something about her. She's a very amazing person. Dr. Simone is the founder and director of MAD Topics, Symposium, and Praxis. She's a faculty member in in curriculum and instruction here at Tech. Her groundbreaking work has been featured in the International OCD Foundation and the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. Kinsey, we love you, we appreciate you, and we're all here because of your vision. Thank you so much.
Doug's my best friend, everybody. He's awesome, so he didn't say that about himself.
Great, that's on video now. No, we're not. Let me just go over a couple quick housekeeping rules for y'all. In case you don't know, you go out this door, go out to the right, you'll find the restrooms. Okay? If there is an emergency of any kind, we will direct you, just slowly exit the building, or we'll shelter in place if a storm should happen. Don't see it happening, but I like to make the announcement. If you need assistance, please flag down one of our workers or one of our staff. Be glad to help you with anything you do. And even though Kinsey says I'm her best friend and she loves me to death, but she told me she would kill me if you do not complete the survey at the end of this, okay? There is a QR code, and that's how we get information on what to do next and what we need to do. So make sure you fill that out. That's very, very important. Thank you very much. All right, I'm not used to having notes. All right. Now we're going to move on to the highlights. I'm going to take a few minutes out now, and I'm going to ask our panel, and I'm going to start here with Ben, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves a little more in detail, tell them about why you're here, and then I kind of skimmed over, depression and anxiety. I kind of want you to tell the group what you want to bring to this. What's your perspective to it? What are you bringing here today? What makes you part of this panel? Okay, Ben.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Kraft. I'm a clinician. I'm a licensed therapist here in Tennessee. I specialize in the treatment of anxiety disorders broadly, and also obsessive compulsive disorder. Within that, I also treat major depressive disorder and depressive symptoms, as these things often show up within that. Quickly, I do also just want to thank Dr. Simone for letting me be here today. It really is an honor to have my voice heard, and it's exciting to be a part of something that's so hopeful and inspiring. To outline what I want to talk about and what I'm hoping to kind of bring to the table today, to be simple about it, I want to be helpful. I am often giving sort of these types of talks where I am trying to ride the line between some of my clinical experience, right, and sort of providing education and support to people in the community. It turns out when you come to these things and start spouting off research and statistics and using clinical jargon, it's a pretty good way to bore people to sleep. Finding a way to express some of those things in a way that can still be helpful and interesting is going to be my main goal today. It's a difficult question, though. In the span of my work, and I imagine the people here with me today would agree with this, it can be difficult to differentiate between what is going to be most helpful broadly to such a large group of people. How can I take from my own experiences as someone that both works with these experiences clinically and personally that might actually make some small bit of difference? In these moments, I also tend to ask myself, what do I wish someone could have told me when I was feeling lost in my experiences of anxiety and depression? And to summarize it briefly, I wish somebody could have taught me how to resist struggling with them. You know, we often utilize that term struggle, right? I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with depression. And just to get a basic idea for a second, I have this great metaphor I want to try to utilize real fast, okay? So everybody's familiar with tug of war, the game, right? All right, so I got one end of the rope. Everybody else has to grab the other end, okay? Everybody got it? Pretend like you got it, okay? All right, so I'm anxiety and depression, right? And I'm pulling this rope. But you're trying to get rid of me, so what are you doing? You're pulling the rope back right now, right? And here we are. We're now engaged in the struggle with anxiety and depression now. And so part of what I want to kind of help figure out today is how do we just drop that rope? Does that make sense? Yeah. And it turns out this is a really difficult question for a lot of people. It certainly was for me. But I'm hopeful today that I can provide some context and some answers to that question. So to help me explain this, I thought I might use some of my own experiences with depressive symptoms and feelings of anxiety that actually happened just this week. Because speaking of anxiety, as many of you are likely aware, public speaking is often noted as being one of the more prevalent fears that's out there. So as I sat down to write this opening statement today, I was suddenly met with an onslaught of thoughts. I wrote some of them down. If it's okay, I'm going to share those with you. All right, so are you sure you have something helpful to say? I've already kind of alluded to that problem. What if it's boring? I kind of alluded to that one too. What if you say something somebody else on the panel disagrees with? The next one, I just wrote worst case scenarios with an exclamation point because my brain had come up with like a million of them all at once, and I decided I probably didn't need to write them all down. At a certain point, I was even envisioning a fake news article headline that said something to the effect of "Stupid therapist crash and burns at Mad Topic Symposium." Mind you, all these thoughts were coming before I'd even typed a single word. I'm still staring at a Word document with just a cursor on it, right? And then there's what comes next, which I've titled here as feelings. My brain fuses to these thoughts. Fusion's a term we use in acceptance and commitment therapy. It essentially just means that our brain interprets the thoughts as real or possible. And with that fusion, I end up experiencing, anxiety. I feel overwhelmed, and I begin feeling and engaging in active worry, right? And then what comes after that? These feelings begin to produce behaviors. Ironically, these behaviors come about in an attempt to get rid of the very distressing feelings that were actually motivating the behaviors. Chief among these is avoidance. Suddenly I'm reaching for my phone, doom scrolling, which most scrolling is doom these days, it seems. Suddenly I'm also doing random chores, which is ironic because I had been avoiding those chores up until this point that I started avoiding this. But suddenly there were so many chores I realized I could start doing. And then those behaviors are going to lead to secondary thoughts, or a second amount of thoughts. What I've titled here on my page is thoughts number 2. So these thoughts, which I'll share with you now again, wait, maybe you aren't going to get this done at all. Are you just going to avoid it until it's too late and disappoint everybody, including including Kinsey and your boss and your colleagues, etc.? No, you can't panic. Just breathe, take it easy, it's going to be okay. Why am I like this? Why can't I just stop being lazy and avoidant? Why can't I just be good enough? Feelings Part 2, shame, guilt, sadness, hopelessness, tiredness, despair. And then the behaviors from those feelings, one of my favorites is rumination. Not really, I don't like it, but the amount of times that I do it, you would think it was one of my favorites. In other words, I engage in these purposeful thought cycles where I seem to confirm all the self-criticisms I have. There seems to be no end to the number of perceived failures or shortcomings that my brains can pull up from the past, while simultaneously looking into a metaphorical crystal ball about the future and also seeing nothing but more failures and more shortcomings. Suddenly my motivation is shot, and I desire to do nothing more than lay in bed, stare at a screen, and give up. What's the point anyway? It's the last thought my brain says in that moment. Now, what's interesting about this is a few things. Number one, I think this is actually pretty prevalent. I'm sure we may at some point highlight some statistics about depression and anxiety, but they tend to hover around the 20-25% range, which is bizarre to me. I've never heard of 75% of people not experiencing these types of things. So I think they are much more prevalent, and to be frank, as much as this experience was difficult for me, I don't think it was special. I think it was actually fairly typical. This also highlights how the categories of anxiety and depression often coexist and tend to react in the context of one another. In simple terms, when we struggle with anxiety, it's easy to feel hopeless, and when we feel hopeless, we'll eventually engage in a thought pattern and behaviors that define depression. Right? The other interesting part, in my opinion, is in the midst of all this moment, nothing in my external world changed. Nothing. I'm still at home. I'm at my computer. I still haven't typed anything on the page, right? Everything in my external world is the same and relatively okay. The only thing that shifted was how my mind was relating to these thoughts. First, I struggled with them, and that made me anxious. Then I fused to them, and I got stuck. And this is the paradox of anxiety and depression. When we fight, we get more anxious. When we try to resist anxiety or change or struggle with our anxiety, in an attempt to get rid of it, generally speaking, we end up more anxious. When we believe our automatic negative thoughts, we get stuck because, well, they're usually negative, right? By the way, automatic positive thoughts, usually fine, no big deal, right? From this, we can start to understand how cognition works in general, and I'll give a very brief explanation. I could take a really long time here. But what I want everybody to picture for me, just quickly in your minds, is just a triangle, right? This is referred to as the cognitive triangle or the cognitive triad. And you can place these things wherever you want on the triangle, depending on kind of how you feel about them, but here's how I do it. In this corner of the triangle, we have thoughts, right? Up here at the top, we have feelings and emotions, both. And then down here on this corner, we have behaviors. It's important to recognize that behaviors, well, in my opinion, and it depends on sort of which sect of psychology you're a part of, but in my opinion, behaviors are both internal and external, right? So I was having internal behaviors of ruminating, right? Or coming up with worst case scenarios that I could plan for, like the storm coming perhaps, right? But I was also doing external behaviors, right? Like going and doing chores in my house that I've been avoiding all week, for example. And what we have to understand about this cognitive triangle is that all these things react to each other, right? So the thoughts I was having were producing these feelings. The feelings I was having were pushing or motivating behaviors. And then the behaviors that I engaged in triggered new and more thoughts in those moments. I find this can be a helpful thing for people because if we can just be curious about some of the ways that we are feeling. I can't tell you how many of my clients and even myself sometimes are like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. And why sometimes the answer of why, or the answer to why, is somewhat impossible to fully find. But if we can pull the triangle out and acknowledge, like, well, here's how I'm feeling, here's some of my behaviors, what thoughts am I having? Or fill in the blank however you need to. Sometimes just being curious in this way can allow us to gain some perspective. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes can give us a bit of a way out. The examples I was alluding to before about my thought patterns, the feelings that came out of them, and the resulting behaviors show how the cognitive triangle, sometimes left on its own devices, can lead to anxiety and depressive symptoms. Without engaging with it mindfully, without being curious about it, it'll just go around and around and around and continue to kind of cycle or spiral, if you will, in a way that doesn't tend to feel very good and tends to, over time, produce things that will again allude to or contribute to the possibility of diagnosis of an anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder. So what do we do about this? Right? That's the main question. And I have two quick thoughts that I want to run through real quick. The first is a metaphor called monsters on a bus. It comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. And I know it's a little silly, monsters, like what are we talking about here? But just bear with me for a second. I want you to imagine for just a second that there's somewhere you really want to go, right? And you've wanted to go there your whole life. You're super pumped to get there. You've been thinking about it for a really long time, right? And it turns out you're in luck. There's a bus that will take you there. And it's a really nice bus, right? Plenty of seating. It doesn't smell or anything like that, right? And it has this great storage capacity in the bottom of it. So you can actually take stuff with you. Anything you want to go, anything you want to take with you, you can take with you on this bus, okay? There is kind of a catch, though. In the bottom of the bus where all the storage is, there's also these monsters. And I know, it gets a little silly, but here's the idea. When you get on the bus, your bus driver's there and you say, I'm trying to get to this place, I've been wanting to get there my whole life. Bus driver says, hell yeah, let's do it. I'm ready. You say, okay, let's go. Bus driver hits the gas, starts taking you towards the thing that you've been wanting your whole life. But then just as the bus gets going, the monsters come out from the bottom and come into this part of the bus that you are, and they start yelling at you and tormenting you. And these are the anxiety monster, the despair monster, the sadness monster, the guilt and shame monsters. Guilt and shame can be pretty big in these arenas. And what do? They yell at you. They tell you you're not going to be any good. You're going to fail. You're not going to make it. By the time you get there, you're going to be so exhausted and tired or so overwhelmed with your own feelings that it won't matter anyway. They're going to tell you that you're going to make a fool of yourself. They're going to tell you there's no way you can do it. How could you possibly think you could? How could you possibly think you could get to this thing that you wanted to get to your whole life? And they make this deal with you. They say, hey, but if the bus stops, or even better, if the bus goes the opposite direction, the monsters will leave you alone. They'll go back down into the bottom of the bus, and they'll stay there, and they won't bother you anymore. What do we do? Well, people like me and some of the people on this panel, we're going to push you to get back on the bus and get the bus going again. Tell the bus driver to keep moving. And yes, those monsters are going to come out, but as they come out and as you allow them to be there, and you start hearing from them and they keep talking, you'll start to realize that not all of their threats are coming true. Some of them will. Some of their threats will come true, and that sucks. But it turns out even when those threats come true, they're not quite as bad as the monsters made them out to be. Turns out you do get through it. So if we can stay on the bus and allow these monsters to hang out, allow them to sit on the bus with us, and even though they're going to carry on and they're going to yell, they're going to bother us, they're going to make us feel bad, if we can just keep the bus going, eventually we'll even find that some of the monsters calm down a little bit. Some of them go away, some of them get smaller as we keep going. And eventually when we get to the place we're wanting to go, generally speaking, it was worth it the whole time. So, I think this type of perspective and understanding that when we work really hard to try to focus on and avoid our feelings, it usually takes us out of the race. It usually takes the bus in the opposite direction of where we actually want to go. Whereas if we can let the monsters be there, we can still get to where we want to go, and generally speaking, it's going to end up feeling worth it. All right, one more metaphor today. And this is coming from the perspective of the clients that I work with. I want you to imagine for just a moment that everybody here, all humans in fact, have two dials, one on each wrist, okay? On one wrist we have a suffering dial, and it goes 1 to 12, right? We can turn the suffering up or down, kind of. On the other wrist we have what's called a willingness dial. So as a therapist, what often happens is people come into my office and they say, Ben, this suffering dial's at a 12, I can't do this. I have to get this suffering down. We got to get this suffering down to at least a 6, maybe a 7, but it's at a 12. I've got to get it down. And I say, yeah, this sucks. I hear you. And oftentimes they'll tell me all the things they've tried. I've tried meditating, right? I've tried these different therapies. I've tried exercise, so on and so forth. And some of these things were probably beneficial, right? We're not discounting all of them. But I say, okay, if you're willing to try something different, I am noticing you have this other dial over here called willingness. And it's all the way down at a 3. What happens if we crank willingness up to a 6? Does that change anything on the other dial? Does that change anything with suffering? It turns out it does. And I don't have quite enough time to go through all of the details of this, but one of the reasons that happens is because of something called reinforcement and how the brain works, right? And it turns out, over time, that cognitive triangle can get reinforced in such a way where it just compounds itself with these negative thoughts and these negative feelings. But as we make some of these changes and increase our willingness to expose ourselves to those feelings, over time, we can actually provide new reinforcement for our brain. And over time, with the increase in willingness, it does turn out some of those monsters get a little quieter. So in closing, anxiety and depression are part of being human, and that sucks. But fighting them often increases them. Instead of trying to turn down the anxiety dial or the depression dial, try turning up the willingness dial. That will mean different things for different people, and there are different ways to approach that depending on what's going on in your life and what you have access to. But making space for discomfort while focusing on what matters next will always get you closer to where you want to be, and will almost always make you feel proud of yourself for doing it. So the next time you notice anxiety or self-doubt, I'd like to ask you to pause and try to take notice. Am I playing tug of war right now? Is it possible I can drop this rope and move forward anyway? Because it turns out we are not our thoughts, we are not our anxiety, we are not our depressive symptoms, and we don't have to wait for them to disappear before we start living our life and doing the things we want to do. All right, that's my opening statement. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Dr. Schultz?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd Schultz, and it might seem a little unnatural for a bunch of people with anxiety to be sitting here having you stare at us, but it is a bit unnatural for all of us, I think, to some degree. But I'm not a therapist. I'm not a clinician. I'm an educator, as you'll find out in a minute. My background's in special education. And currently I'm working with doctoral students, coaching them through an arduous process called a dissertation. And so that's what I'm currently doing. I'm grateful for being asked to share my story today. It's not an intimidating experience for me. This is, but sharing the story is not. I want to thank my wife, Jackie. She has endured my emerging awareness of anxiety. My experiences with anxiety predated her, but it was her patience and care that facilitated my willingness to be treated. I also want to thank my daughter, who assists Dr. Simone with this event. She was the first to mention this event, and it was the graciousness of Dr. Simone that allowed me this opportunity. My experiences with anxiety reflect two different periods of time in my life. The first period of time was during a childhood when most kids should be more concerned about friendships in schools. Mine was not. The second period of time went into my middle and adult years, where I became more aware of my anxiety, but never really considered the possibility that it was connected to a chronic problem that I had from a rare childhood disease that was diagnosed at my birth. I compartmentalized my anxiety throughout my adult life to an unexplainable part of my life experience. It was just something that was there, and therefore it didn't get diagnosed till literally just a few years ago. I was born in 1968 with an obscure rare disease called phenylketonuria. It's the abbreviation is PKU, and that's how I refer to it. PKU is a rare metabolic disorder that causes an amino acid called phenylalanine to build up in the body. A person with PKU does not possess the enzyme necessary to break down this amino acid, causing a buildup in the body. When the amino acid accumulates, it can cause developmental delays, severe neurological damage, social, behavioral, and psychological challenges. The primary way that phenylalanine builds up in the body is through ingesting protein-rich foods. And so therefore, children and adults with PKU stay on a lifelong diet, protein-free, that involves pretty much anything you can think of with food intake. Children are screened at birth for PKU and diagnosed a short time later. Children who are born today are coached and trained to stay on this protein-free diet for their entire life. However, myself and others like me who were born at a period of time when there was not a lot known about PKU were told that we could leave the diet at some point in our childhood. Consequently, PKU has caused many people over the last several decades to be born with and suffer a variety of effects, including developmental, neurological damage, as well as social and behavioral effects. And while there's multiple effects that are documented, I have not had to endure the results of severe neurological damage, at least not as of yet. I've experienced gastrointestinal symptoms, which, if logic tells you if your body can't process that protein, that phenylalanine, then it tries to get rid of it. And so I've had those problems throughout my life. I've also had the lingering effects of depression and anxiety. PKU patients are, according to one particular source I looked at, experience disturbances in neurotransmitter synthesis causing decreased positive emotions, low self-esteem, and social isolation and withdrawal. And so, on a personal note, I told Kenzie I'm transparent to a fault. If you watch me in a crowd, you will see me by myself. That's where I'm at. It's where I'm most comfortable, in a crowd. And so it's where I find my comfort, and that's one of the actual effects of PKU with people that deal with that. Research has shown that lower levels of dopamine and serotonin in the brain are associated with the cognitive and intellectual disabilities of some PKU patients, as well as psychiatric disorders like depression, anxiety, and behavioral and cognitive effects that oftentimes go along with disorders like ADHD. Well, here's how it affected me throughout my life. In childhood, I experienced a lot of anxiety in learning situations. In learning situations that challenged my reasoning skills. As a result, I never experienced a math class that felt like friendly territory. Okay? Those challenges with reasoning skills were often associated with mathematical higher level reasoning. Some fine motor skills have been impacted with me. Anytime my joke is I can't count my way out of a box, and I really can't. Anyone who knows me knows that well. It followed me throughout my entire academic career, all the way through when I got my doctorate degree. As a child, I remembered feeling nervous every single day I went into a typical primary, middle school, high school math class because I knew it was beyond my reach. As much as I love to learn, I was never completely comfortable in a school situation. I dreaded going to lunch when I was a child because in my formidable years, because I couldn't eat protein-rich foods, the school would provide a special lunch for me, which was appreciated except for the fact, what did it do? It singled me out with my peers. So I didn't like that. So something that people look forward to with lunch, I often dreaded as I went through that space. I never felt comfortable in typical social situations that kids normally want, like parties, hanging out with people, that kind of thing. I made friends easily, but upon reflection, it was normally when I was put in the middle of crowds or in academic situations that I was unprepared to navigate, causing acute anxiety, much like today. I played sports as a basketball player, and I was a swimmer, but being watched by crowds of people never really bothered me all that much beyond the typical nerves of what you would associate with those types of events. The childhood experiences I had with anxiety often surfaced in certain academic and social situations where I had the responsibility to navigate large groups of people or to perform up to certain people's expectations. I remember my childhood years as an intense time of hunger. I was always hungry. Though my mother successfully implemented a lot of recipes that supplemented the food that I could not eat, I remember prevailing feelings of anxiety related to school and social situations. My childhood anxiety began to develop into chronic worry and phobias into my adult years. While I did not associate even then these experiences with PKU, anxiety revealed itself in certain situations. For example, I adamantly tried to avoid socializing in crowds. Oddly enough, I was a minister for almost 15 years of my life in large and small churches. I preached in large crowds and I preached in small crowds. I'm very used to the mechanics of this. Today showed me the chronic nature of anxiety, that it has degraded my ability to cope with situations like this. And, for whatever that helps, hopefully at the end of this, I'll give you a little hope beyond that, because I am sitting up straight still and haven't fallen over. So there you go. I felt a loss of control and a sense of social anxiety to carry conversations in certain situations, and that pattern has followed me throughout my adult life. It wasn't until 5 years ago when I began to experience severe neurological symptoms that my wife and I began to consider that the effects of PKU had caught up with me. And after meeting with a dietitian and a nurse who are contacts in Tennessee for all things PKU, I restarted the diet to regulate my ingestion of phenylalanine. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. I'm 56, by the way. I've dealt with this my whole life, and I was just diagnosed 2 years ago. So if that gives you any idea of the time span. And I now take medication to curb its effects. Today, I'm much more aware of the feelings of anxiety in situations that have not normally bothered me. For example, church attendance. I grew up in a church setting. Whether you did or not, there's going to be other settings that you may be able to adapt to. In my situation, it was church attendance. Now I'm having to learn how to adapt to the proximity of crowds. When my daughter graduated from the University of Tennessee, my wife and I had to develop a plan to cope with the large crowds walking around the arena in close proximity to each other. I have fully embraced these limitations associated with this rare disorder. However, anxiety in church has been my greatest challenge because it represented my personal space and my professional space that I'm most comfortable with, as well as my individual values. Having said that, what I face today, embracing that without shame or regret, has helped me to cope with the effects of social anxiety disorder. For years, I worked as a special education teacher and for a short time as a district administrator in special ed. I enjoyed working with an amazing group of kids because I could relate to the challenges that they faced every single day going to school. For many of them, a classroom never represented a friendly environment for them, and I could relate to that on a personal level. I taught them one of the coping skills that I'd learned early on in my academic career, and one that carried me through, frankly, up until just recently. I've told them, never deny the challenges you face. Embrace them as opportunities to adapt to difficult circumstances, to strengthen the value you bring into a situation. The very things that we think devalue us as human beings or as people in a situation are the very things that bring the value that others need. I found myself recently taking my own advice that I'd given a lot of kids over the years when I frequently faced similar situations of high anxiety. And so today, if you deal with anxiety for whatever reason, I encourage you to embrace this reality in your life. As I'm learning in this very meeting, if I had never discovered what I'd been dealing with in my childhood and adult years, I would have never had the chance to engage my own family, my own daughter, my sons, my wife, and all the anxieties that we face, nor would I have ever had the opportunity to share my story with any of you. I'm very grateful for this opportunity and hope that my story for these last few moments has given you some perspective to understand the evolving journey of your own life. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Can we hear me? There we go. My name's Katie Mixon. I am a graduate assistant here at Tennessee Tech, getting my master's degree in curriculum and instruction. I got my undergrad here in secondary education mathematics, so I'm a math teacher, ironically. So I am going to share my story about anxiety. It has been a lifelong companion for me. It is something I've dealt with since my earliest memories, unfortunately. I was always labeled as shy. So, for example, when I was at church, I would never go to the children's service because I would be clinging to my mom's leg. And I was like, oh, she's just shy. But if they tried to pull me off her leg, I would just cry, and I was labeled as throwing a tantrum. But truly, I was so scared. I was so full of fear, right? Because I found safety in my parents. And when you're young, it's normal to have that kind of anxiety, right? So, but maybe not normal to think that your parents are going to die when they're separated from you and you're never going to see them again, or you're going to get hurt in some way. That's not normal. So that was my reality. I started journaling when I was 11 years old, and I found this excerpt from when I was 12. I was on the school bus, and I was just sitting there silently thinking to myself about what I would do to keep my little sister and I alive if my parents died. So I was so worried about that on the bus that I wrote 5 whole pages, and I'm going to read that to you right now. No. I'm not going to read the 5 whole pages, but I will sum it up. I said, I'm going to unplug everything in the house so we can save money on the electric bill. I'm going to find the secret stash of money that my parents have hidden, and the $40 I have from babysitting will help. How am I going to feed my sister and I? Well, we'll take our bikes to Kroger, and I'll use my $40 from babysitting, and that'll feed us for the month. I didn't quite understand how groceries worked. How I was going to get us to school. 5 straight pages of just this thinking and this ruminating of what I'm going to do if my parents die. On the bus, most kids are roughhousing and like getting in trouble, and I was just thinking, and I couldn't stop. So this is what anxiety is like for me. It's this constant stream of fear and nervousness over things that aren't really going to happen, things that aren't real. So externally, I was very shy and quiet, but internally was not quiet at all. Another thing I wrote when I was 13, it's very angsty, I'll warn you, I was a teenager, but I think it sums up kind of what anxiety was like. When words come flying at you, when words overflow, words overwhelming to my mind, words so fast I can't comprehend, words so clear and so blurry. What kind of riddle is that? But that's exactly what that rumination was like for me. So there was just this constant voice that I couldn't turn off, and still today as an adult, that voice is there, but I have learned to manage it, which I'll get to. Middle school anxiety was definitely getting worse because as you're developing and young adult or adolescence, you start caring more about what your peers think about you and being very aware of that. So with that anxiety, I got depression as well. And this is when I really started isolating myself and avoiding many things. I didn't have very many friends. I quit sports. I actually had auditioned for a middle school play, and I got one of the main parts. But I was so anxious, I went to my theater teacher and I quit. I told her to give it to somebody else because I couldn't convince myself to do it. So it really held me back in a lot of ways. Anxiety also took my memories, and by that I mean I wasn't able to create very many memories in middle school because I wasn't doing anything, and because I was so in my head, I was never present. So when I think about middle school, I'm like, yeah, it sucked, but I can't really remember many details about it. I actually, in preparation for this panel, I asked my mom, I said, Mom, was I really that bad in middle school? She goes, you don't remember? I was like, no. She goes, you cried every single day. Every single day you cried when you were going into school, and I didn't know how to help you. That hurts when you hear that from your mom. Fortunately, she did recognize that I was anxious when I was a child, and that had gotten worse in middle school. So she put me in therapy. There, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and depression, and I got on antidepressants. So it helped a little bit, but it was middle school. My mom got me connected with my guidance counselor who worked with my teachers, and I was given the, accommodation that if I needed to step out, if I was feeling overwhelmed in class or I was ruminating, I could leave and I could go to the counselor's office. So I'm very, very lucky that I had that support. High school wasn't very different. Again, avoiding things, keeping myself from going to football games. I didn't go to dances. I started theater because I really liked it, but I quit because I didn't want to perform in front of my peers. So I was just surviving. And then things started to get worse. My first day of community college, I arrived to my very first class, which was Intro to Psychology. I got there 30 minutes early. Why? I was anxious. I had that stream of thoughts. Am I going to be late? Is the teacher already going to be in there? Is class going to be started? Am I going to be able to find a seat? Like, just over and over. It was 30 minutes early. Nobody was there. It was just me. So I got in. I took a seat, and about 10 minutes later, another student came in. And he looked at me, he gave me a smile, and he sat directly next to me. Now, as an adult, I can look back and say, oh, it was probably his first day at school. He was probably a little nervous and anxious to start his first college course. But at that time, the thoughts started running. I was already nervous about class, and now I'm like, why is he sitting next to me? There's a room full of empty seats. Why did he sit next to me? What are his intentions? Is he going to hurt me? So what did I do? I left class, I went home, and I dropped the class. And I didn't go back. So that's not healthy. That's not normal. I moved out here to tech, and still, progressively, anxiety was worse. I could not go to the grocery store. I would sit in the parking lot at Walmart, and one time I sat there for 2 hours trying to psych myself up to go in the store, and I couldn't. And so I went home. You're thinking, you couldn't go in the grocery store? I don't know why. It just gave me so much anxiety, because when I would go in, I would feel like the walls were closing in on me, and I would just shake, like I'm shaking now, but that's a different fear. And so that's when someone close to me in life said, not so kindly, remember, I'm studying education. She said, Katie, you can't even go to a grocery store by yourself. How are you going to get in front of a room of kids and teach them? And that hurt. So I put myself in therapy, as my mom had done for me in middle school. As an adult, I was able to find a provider, and that's when she encouraged me to find evidence, right? My anxious thoughts are so irrational, and they make no sense. So she said, find evidence, experiences from your life that things are going to be okay. And that's when I started challenging my anxiety. Not perfectly. I think it's easy for us to try something new, try a new strategy, go to therapy, and when we don't get that instant fix, that instant change, we give up. But healing is not linear. So I did okay at first, and I would have some good days, and I would have really bad days, and I would be so discouraged by that. But I kept working at it, and right over time, even with our dips, I've healed so much. So even looking at the past 5 years, I've grown, and I still have bad days. A couple weeks ago, I had a bad one. I felt like I was in middle school again, but I have my mom's voice in my mind, and she's like, Katie, tomorrow's a new day. So even when I have those bad days, I think about it, I process it, might journal a little bit, and I go wake up the next day, and it's a new day. So with that practice, I've stopped avoiding places, and I've started participating and being present. So now every time I go into a grocery store, I still have a little bit of anxiety about it, but I go in, and guess what? Nothing bad happens. And I've found evidence to prove my anxiety wrong. So much of my life, I've let anxiety control me. But now I control it. And I think it's important to remember, especially as children, right? Anxiety serves a function. It's there to keep you safe. If people didn't experience anxiety, there wouldn't be very many people, right? Because it keeps you out of dangerous situations. So I know that my anxiety's intention is not to harm me or keep me from doing things, it's to keep me safe. So I've learned to have a conversation with my anxiety. So I have like anxious Katie and I have adult Katie. And we go back and forth, and I ask it, I'm like, what is the very worst thing that can happen? I'm already thinking that, so I know the answer in my head. I'm like, how likely is that going to happen? Is that realistic? And usually it's not very likely and it's not very realistic. I'm like, okay, and I can turn the volume down on that anxiety. So I know that I will always have anxiety and I will continue to have those thoughts just like I'm having them now, but I will also continue to be successful. I got through my undergrad degree. I did my student teaching. I taught well. I've started my master's degree, saying that I'm not going to be able to teach. I do teach, and I take that perspective with me, and I have compassion toward those students, especially the ones that don't like math. But I can see when I have a student that's going through things, and they communicate with me, and sometimes I know I don't need to call on them today. They need that day off, right? So I can have that compassion toward them. I have a final quote. When I was in kindergarten, I moved from Nashville to Knoxville, and my kindergarten teacher sent a letter to my new teacher that I would be having. She said, "Katie had some difficulty with anxiety, but with a little patience, she'll come around." So if you're experiencing anxiety or you're a parent of someone who has it or a teacher, have some patience and help them practice collecting that evidence to prove their anxiety wrong. Because for me, with much, much patience toward myself, I've learned how to manage it, and I've come so far, and I feel like I'm finally coming around. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Edwards.
So my name is Derek Edwards. I'm an assistant professor of psychology here at Tennessee Tech. I have been at Tech. I came here as a student in 2003 and just never left. Cookeville's kind of that place where once you get a taste of it, I don't know, it's you just can't really leave it. I'm not being held against my will, though. I do want to say that out loud, which works. Like Ben, I am a clinician, so I'm a Tennessee licensed professional counselor, mental health service provider, and I am also in clinical practice to maintain my license, and so grateful to work at a university that allows us to do that as well. I will say I don't enjoy following Katie right now when she ends the story with the thing that brings your feels up into your throat. And there does seem to be a little dust in the room at the moment. So if my eyes are watery, my apologies for the dusty room here. What an amazing quote, right? What an amazing quote with a little patience. Beautiful. You see, that's really the topic, this idea of mad topics. This is what's so important, because when we refuse to medicalize humanity, when we stop pathologizing humans, we get to see one another for the beauty that is all of the differences that are in us. Like so many of you right now, when Todd's saying, I never found a math class that was friendly, I almost heard 3 amens. And he was a preacher, so he would have really liked that, you know? And you feel this moment of feeling stuck and overwhelmed. And in our world, what we've really done, and especially, unfortunately, in the world of mental health, we've said, if you feel stuck or overwhelmed, it's a disease. You know, you're disordered. So it makes me think of something that Ben was talking about a minute ago. I love how he started, and makes me wish that I would have written notes, but the way I avoid anxiety is something called procrastination. Don't tell my chair or my dean that I said that. But he listed all of those thoughts, right? And just a show of hands, if you don't mind, anybody else relate to that snowball of thoughts? Yeah. And then I'm going to ask you to be brave just for a second. Leave your hand up and then look around. So what we can't do anymore is lie to ourselves that we are all alone, that we are the only one who struggles or who feels this way or who gets stuck. Because in Ben's list of thoughts, he then had a choice. And here's the beautiful thing. The choice is what we call in our field an appraisal. And you get to choose, really, how you appraise your thoughts, how you evaluate your thoughts. And what we often see, and the thing that kind of leads us down a scary road, is we appraise our thoughts with phrases like, I'm broken. I'm weak. I'm a failure. I'm unlovable. We appraise these snowballing thoughts in such a negative way towards us that we are inevitably stuck with them. And that is the medicalized version of mental health. It is the pathologizing of humanity. Now, in 2004, I joined the fire service. So I've been a firefighter just past 20 years. And I work in my clinical practice almost exclusively with emergency responders, fire, EMS, and police. And what I find in these responders is they often experience mental health intrusions, right? The things that they experience, the things that they witness, the things that they're called to do will sometimes find its way into their mind's eye. But I don't believe that they're broken. I don't believe that if you witness death, depravity, and destruction and you feel it, I don't believe that you are broken. I believe that you are human. So in my clinical practice, what I try to do is get them to reappraise what they're experiencing. They're not weak, cut out for the job, a failure. They're human. Those very parts of us that really kind of get in the way. What would it mean if none of us on the panel had a little bit of nervousness right now? It would mean that we weren't really caring about what was going to occur. There's something that happens in the world of psychotherapy where we talk about the evaluation of emotions. And we're guilty of this. And our culture is really big on this right now. We say that there are good emotions and bad emotions. But this is a lie of our society. There are no good or bad emotions. There are only emotions. And they serve a function in the same way that our pain signals in our body serve a function. I do a thought exercise with so many of my classes, and I'll say, have any of you around your adolescent years, did you have your appendix ripped out of your body? You know, hopefully they did it by a surgeon. Now, that's a whole other problem we'll deal with later. But I asked them the same question. How did you know that you needed your appendix removed? And what do they say? It hurt? Yeah. Because if it didn't hurt, we would have never known that there was something there. We would have never known that there was a need that needed to be tended to. And it would have been the thing that killed you. Our pain has a purpose. And our pain emotionally also serves a purpose. It serves a function. There's a new term that's coming around in the world of mental health, which I am in love with, which is the term psychache. We are familiar with headache or stomach ache or toothache. And there's this new one, psychache, an aching of the soul. There's something there. There's something that matters. There's something that's meaningful. As a clinician, what I want for my clients, I mean, obviously I want relief for them. I want them to have freedom. I believe the number one job of a clinician is the installation of hope. Not that I can make anything better. As a clinician, I think if any of us tell you that we can fix it, we're lying. But I will walk through hell with you where you won't be alone. And that's how we instill hope in our clients. So the installation of hope is powerful because what I want most of all for my client is for them to see that they have a future. Unfortunately, what happens when we start removing hope from our daily existence, we start to have something called veiled hope. And veiled hope is a lie, right? And veiled hope is what ultimately will lead some people to taking their own lives. They'll say, there is hope in this. And that is a lie. Because there is hope so long as we keep that bus moving forward. I love that metaphor, Ben. One of the things that I see in clinical practice when we start looking at this appraisal and we start trying to wrestle with what these feelings are like is any of my students, if you ever ask them, what does Dr. Edwards say about avoidance? They will say, avoid avoidance at all cost. Whether my student hated my class or loved my class, so whether they roll their eyes when they say it or not, they will say avoid avoidance at all costs. I want to show you that you instinctively know this. I have two children. They are 12 and 11. I wanted to have them far apart, so I think you know who makes the decisions in my family. My daughter is 11, If she comes to my room tonight and she says, Daddy, there's a monster in my closet, all of you in the room know the right answer. Some of you are parents. You definitely know the right answer. And it's that we're going to go check that closet. But let's play a fun game. Let's say that I let Elizabeth stay in my bed tonight. She's going to feel really good in that moment. She's going to get some relief in that moment. She's going to feel safe, just like you said. I found safety in my parents. She's going to feel that. And that's cute right now because she's 11. But at some point, she's going to be 18. And I'm going to get a motorcycle again. That's a selfish reason. Right now, my daughter isn't with me. She needs to learn that even when she's not with me, she is safe. If I let her sleep in my bed for a month, parents in the room, what's it going to be like to get her back to her bedroom? Impossible. I love it. That's the closest to an amen we'll get. I like it. I can turn her room into any useless room I want to. Something ridiculous, like a home gym. Like, ain't nobody going in there, like pointless. But instead, I'm going to walk her to her closet. I'm going to watch her little hand go towards the doorknob, and it's going to start to shake. I'm going to watch her throw open the door. I'm not going to throw open the door for a couple of reasons. One, I need her to do hard things. And two, low-key, I'm a little afraid of the dark. And when she opens that closet, she's going to see there's no monster. Avoiding avoidance at all costs is one of the most essential functions we have in keeping psychache, and preventing it from becoming a disorder. Because that's my goal, right? There's something called a primary intervention, keeping healthy people healthy. And if you have worry, struggle, sadness, heartache, heartbreak, if you have psychache, you're human. You're healthy. How do we keep that from taking over your life? Well, we avoid avoidance at all costs. If you avoid 3 things, I can guarantee. You will not get better, you will not stay the same, and you will get worse. You instinctively knew this about my daughter and trying to sleep in my bed to avoid the monsters. And this is true time and time again. I love one of the things that Katie said was, I'm getting better at doing this. I'm gaining the evidence I need to know that the grocery store isn't full of monsters. And the only way we do that is through this avoidance of avoidance. If you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, we're not sponsored, and you buy a plant, that plant's going to come with a little tag to help take care of it, right? It's going to tell you how much sun you need to give it, how much water you need to give it. I've never read one nor kept a plant alive, but they do have those, okay? The way I teach depression is a depression plant. And if I read the depression plant tag, it says, plant me in a dark, socially isolated environment. This is one of the most difficult features of depression, right? It's when I no longer feel like I can go out. And it feels safe in my room, in my dorm room, in my apartment, in my bedroom. It feels safe. The world's not scary. It's not going to get me. And the depression plant's like, oh yeah, I love this. If I wanted to kill a cactus, I would water it a lot. If I want to kill a depression plant, I'm going to socialize it. I'm going to get it around others who see them. I'm going to get the depression plant outside of my bedroom, outside of my dorm room, outside of my mental walls, and I'm going to parade it around. But our society says, I'm okay, you're okay, let's just not talk about it. And that's the power of Mad Topics. Because right now, if you're letting your depression plant show a little bit, if it was a struggle for you to come in here today, please hear that plant is on its way out. You are killing this depression plant, and it's beautiful. One of the techniques the depression plant uses is it brings along a weed with it called anxiety. And anxiety is the thing that keeps reminding you that it's not safe outside of those walls, outside of those doors. Just to keep this plant safe, keep it socially isolated, keep it in a dark environment, and it will continue to grow, and it will continue to blossom. And ultimately, that plant will consume us unless we avoid avoidance at all costs. I ask my clients to change wants to willing. No one wants to have a bad day. But are you willing? Are you willing to have a bad day? I work with my responders who are experiencing intrusive thoughts about some of the worst parts of humanity. And I've never met one who wants to see that again. Over my 20-year career, I've seen a lot of things that I hope none of you ever see. And I don't want to revisit those. But I promise you that I am willing. And because I'm willing to have a bad day, or willing to have a nightmare, or willing to have an intrusive thought, I'm actually less likely to have them. So this is something called an ironic process. You can't think about not thinking about something. Now let that one sink in for a minute. The more you try to think about not thinking about something, the more you're thinking about it. This is the stuff of Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger. Every kid went to bed and said the same thing. Don't think about Freddy. And what were they thinking of? You nailed it. If my responder wakes up in the morning and says, don't think about that call, don't even begin to think about that call, they're thinking about it. Ben ended with a metaphor which is evidence clearly that he is a therapist. We speak only in metaphors because we'd like you to come back for a revisit. So I'll leave you with a metaphor as well. Soon in Tennessee, it'll be July. We'll be regretting our decision about living in Tennessee. And we'll have one of those days where you can hear the sun. Picture that day. It's bright, overwhelming bright. And a small cumulus cloud will eclipse the sun's face. And you'll watch the shade cast over maybe the quad or maybe your backyard. If we radically accept that that cloud is going to pass by, it will eclipse the sun and move on. But what we often do when we have an intrusive thought or a difficult day is we run as fast as we can in the direction of that cloud, staying only in its shadow. Avoiding avoidance at all costs is you saying, I am willing for today to suck. Because 5 years from now, in spite of my dips, I won't even recognize that old Katie. I won't even recognize how difficult it was. And we'll be somewhere much, much better. A future that you can't even see, but I can promise you exists. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very, very much. Now, what does a moderator get to do? I get to ask questions. And I'm so mean. I didn't even tell them what the questions were going to be. And they were all like, can we see the list? And I was like, here's a bunch of questions. But I want to kind of go ahead and tell you what I told them. We have the most unique opportunity here today. We have the clinical side, and we have the lived experience. And a lot of times, we have questions and we'll get the diagnostic answer and we'll be like, okay, but how does that apply to me? And today we have the chance where we can look at both sides of that coin. And out of the theme, if you listen to all of them, you'll notice that a lot of times we talk about things, I didn't realize this was what depression was. I didn't realize until this was going on. And so that'll give us a chance to really get a better understanding of what's going on in our own lives and how we struggle and how we overcome these things. So what I'm going to put to panel, I'm going to pick one person and ask them the question. And what I would really love for you all to do is to build on their answer. And I'll go ahead and throw the first question out. I want to start with Dr. Edwards. And here's the question. Capital of, no. I want to ask you, I want you to, and I know you could do this hands down if I said, could you give a clinical definition of depression and anxiety? But I don't want to do that. I want you to tell me in more of a layman's terms and more in how you see it. Explain it to like I was a student and I don't know what depression really is. Can you tell me what that looked like? What's that feel like? What does that sound like? And if one of you all want to answer that, when did you come to the realization, this is what it is? This is how it makes sense to me, that epiphany moment, And maybe you're out here and you're suffering from this, and then all of a sudden you'll be like, okay, I see the connection. So, are you ready?
I've been ready since you were talking 5 minutes ago.
Okay, you only have 2 minutes. Go.
So what I would say is depression is often confused for the word sadness. And even sometimes you'll hear depression as really sad. So it's clinically sad. But depression isn't sadness. Depression is a word that means to slow, right? So to slow you down. And that's really what makes depression that clinical feature. So a typical human experience that gets in the way of functioning, now we start looking at disorder. So I'm going to be thinking more slowly, right? Which is impressive for me to think slower than I already do. But it's going to be harder for me to think, right? It's going to be harder for me to get thought to go from point A to point B. I might also be moving more slowly and speaking more slowly than typical. As a clinician, one of the things I'm really looking for is this kind of lack of motivation in doing things, right? And as it starts to really ramp up, we're no longer taking care of ourselves. So we're failing to meet what, if there's any nurses in the room, those ADLs, right? We're not taking care of those activities of daily living. We're not showering, we're not brushing our teeth, we're not messing with our hair. Some of us have an advantage there. It is really quick hair routine for me, so I don't even worry about that. But we're struggling to get those things going. So for depression, just think of a slowing down of you, right? And another nice kind of metaphorical way of looking at this, you're trying to run with concrete shoes, would be for me something you start leaning towards depression. Ben shook his head. Yes, that's two clinicians.
Yeah, I'll agree with everything Derek said. I think I often look at it in terms of functioning as well. And then as someone that enjoys thinking about thoughts, sometimes the content of the thoughts can be notable within depression, especially the thought content with regards to the self. What thoughts are coming up, what thoughts we're fused to, what thoughts we are believing with regards to ourself or with regards to how other people might think of us or our abilities or our ability to do the things that we might want to do, right? When hopelessness is a part of those thoughts, or when they are overwhelmingly self-critical, for example, right? I think those are often pretty definitional towards depressive symptoms and are often going to eventually lead to a point where we're going to start to worry about function.
Trying to remember my experiences with depression. That was primarily in middle school for me, and it looked like what you know depression is, right? Not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to wake up from my eternal sleep is what I really wanted. Unfortunately, during that time, I was taking a lot of naps because that was my escape. That was my way out. Right, I already had the constant stream of thoughts from the anxiety, and then those thoughts of worthlessness, helplessness. I'm never going to get better. Life's never going to get better. Everything's terrible, right? You get stuck in that, and you definitely feel like it will never end. So yeah, naps were my escape. In high school, I started, I guess, realizing that, how do I want to say this? I started to learn to appreciate what I did have, because a big part of my depression, I was like, everyone else has it better. And I was like, if I just had this, if I just had this, if I could just be like this. And when I started to accept myself a little bit more and what I had and the skills that I do have, I came out of that a little bit. I grew out of that. So that was kind of my experience with depression.
In our culture now of social media, in our youngest of generations, when they have that same kind of struggle of everyone else has it better, because we rarely find rooms like this, we often miss misjudge how great others have it, and I'm seeing the highlight reels of everyone's life, and really gets in the way. So that can really start to ramp that up at a young age.
Building on that comment, what are some other kind of, I know in a clinical term, cognitive errors that we make, that we tell ourselves, when we're thinking about things, oh, well, I'm an imposter or different things. What's some of the things that people should know to look for, or maybe be warning signs that person should go, wait a minute, that's just a wrong way of thinking?
So I refer to these as cognitive distortions, and I talk about them all the time. I want to quickly just note, though, cognitive distortions are super normal, as it turns out. Cognitive distortions are actually a tool that our brain utilizes. They come from an evolutionary holdover. I give you a very quick example. Remember, the software we have right now, our brains, are like 200,000 years old, which is crazy, right? I mean, just for a second, like that's crazy. Society is a blip in comparison to that. But 200,000 years ago, if you heard a scurry in the bushes, right, it was more evolutionary advantage for you to assume what? Predator, yeah, that something's gonna hurt you, right? You get the hell out of there, right? Even if it wasn't, as it turns out, it was more advantageous, it was more likely that you would survive and eventually produce offspring if you assumed in that moment there was a predator. Now that is a cognitive distortion. That is a version of all or nothing thinking, right? We skipped all the gray area. It could have been a scurrying mouse or the wind, right? We moved all the way to the worst case scenario, the all as opposed to the nothing, right? In that moment. We all do this on a regular basis. Where it gets a little tricky, though, is where these cognitive distortions start to come out with regards to ourselves, for example, right? I am bad at my job, right? As a therapist, that thought certainly pops up sometimes, right? But am I bad at my job? Or did I have a difficult session, right? And so things like that. We got a few of these. So all or nothing, mind reading, right, is one of the best. I think in the social anxiety area, that's one that we tend to see the most, right? And it's interesting, when people engage in mind reading, not real mind reading, you understand, but assuming that they know what other people are thinking. If you can actually mind read, please come talk to me after this, okay? But when you engage in mind reading, it's never positive. I've never heard anyone go, well, they were thinking all the amazing things about me while I was up there giving that talk, right? No, it's instead, did you see the look on that person's face? They hate me, right? This is another example. One other one that I love is I call it crystal balling, right? This is the idea that we know what's going to happen in the future. Again, I've ran into a couple of people where they look into the future and they see positive things pretty often. That's amazing, right? But for the most part, most of us, because of this evolutionary hangover, when we think about the future, what do we consider happening? Usually something all or nothing, and it's usually not great, right? So, I think cognitive distortions are an important thing to pick out because I call it sort of the first off-ramp in the anxiety or depression cycle. Because if you can challenge some of these thoughts, to be clear, as some of our colleagues here suggested, those thoughts aren't going to go away. Your brain's still going to do this in the future. Again, it's evolution, right? But if you can acknowledge, there I'm doing it, I'm mind reading again. All right, I don't have to believe that everybody in this room hates me right now, right? That could provide a little bit of a moment of relief where we don't have to engage in all the rumination and the thinking, the association there. There's a ton of categories of cognitive distortions. A quick Google will give you a master list of all of them that are super interesting. One more that's just my absolute favorite. Our brain does this funny thing. We often are asking ourselves really big, bold questions that our brain just simply cannot answer, right? One of my favorites that I often hear in the populations I work with is, do I work hard enough? This is a tricky question, right? Our brains just can't possibly come up with an answer. I don't know that anything really can come up with an answer for it, but this one can. So what do we do instead? Our brain does the old bait and switch, right? It's like, all right, I'm not going to tell them, but I'm going to answer a different question instead. Any idea? If our brain can't answer the question, do we work hard enough? What question might it try to ask instead? How about, am I suffering? Am I so tired after work that I can't possibly do anything else? I can't engage in my hobbies. I can't hang out with my kids. Am I not sleeping because I'm staying up late at night working and thinking about work? Every time I go to work, am I staying so long that I can't possibly do anything else? Yes, I am suffering. Well, then yes, I am working hard enough. And that bait and switch can be really problematic because now suddenly the confirmation we were seeking is going to push us towards more behaviors that are actually going to make us feel worse and worse. So it's just one example, right? But be cautious of the bait and switch. Am I a good person? Ooh, that's a rough one too, right? My brain likes to go, did you do anything good for somebody in the past 5 minutes? No? Then no, you're not a good person, right? So it's just another cognitive distortion. All right, I took too much time on that.
No, thank you. Well, it's kind of strange that the way the conversation's going and how we look at it. Let me ask this question here, and because you always get two sides of the coin. What do you find that when you started thinking about therapy and you start thinking about depression and anxiety, and then you get into it, and then you meet with people, what are some of the misconceptions or the myths that people have about it? They come in, they go, this, like you said earlier, most people, when you say depression, they go, that's sadness. But that's a kind of a misconception. It's a little bit more. So what are some of the things, that would help people to understand about the myths and misconceptions of those two?
This is not a clinical perspective, but I was labeled as overdramatic by my entire family because I would be freaking out about the littlest things. Starting a new school year, oh, that was bad. I would cry and cry and cry. Like the weeks of summer, the last 2 weeks I would be thinking about school, and I'd be like, Mom, this is going to happen, blah, blah, blah. Stop being so dramatic. So I think that's a misconception for a lot of people that have anxiety, most definitely.
I think oftentimes people think they're going to come to therapy. We have this thing that people say a lot, and I would love Ben to tell me what the answer is. But they'll say, I'm just here for tools. And as a therapist, you should know that I'm often lost at a hardware store. I'm not real good with tools. I'm really good with feelings. Like if you need feelings work, I can really do that. So they come into therapy and they think, oh, well, Derek is going to have the answers. He's got the keys to Narnia. If I had the answers, I wouldn't tell you my name. Like, if I just had the ability just to, like, therapize you better, I would charge a lot more, and we would only have one session. And, like, that would be it, right? So this idea of I just need you to give me some advice. I'm just really stuck. And it makes me laugh. I don't know if, I'm sure you've had this moment, Ben, where you're with your client and you're thinking, they should see a therapist. And then you're like, oh no. I'm the therapist. And I don't, if any of you are in therapy, your therapist absolutely has thought that before, but it's that human experience. We don't have the right answers, right? Sometimes people, my wife, she's here today, and at church, they'll ask this ridiculous question, which is, what's it like being married to a therapist? Which is a weird question. Don't ask that to anybody, by the way. So I'll intervene, and I'll always answer it the same way. And she is here, so I'm not talking out of church, by the way. And I'll say, well, it's great. One of us is wrong, and the other one's a therapist. We don't have all the right answers. We, as therapists, struggle as well. So I think the perception of the therapist has it all figured out is something that people come into the therapy office with. And if I'm just giving you advice, good news, you're going to be just as screwed up as I am. But if we can work through it, now that's going to be a little bit different. So actual therapy should not involve a lot of advice giving.
I'll second that. I fully agree. I think it reminds me a little bit of Well, first of all, I've had so many people come in and say, I just need the tools. And two parts of that, I fully agreed. It's difficult because I have to first understand what tools you have. And second to that, there's really only one tool in my opinion, and it's called mindfulness. And yeah, a lot of people don't want to utilize it. I think, though, the other thing that I'm reminded of is in the ancient days of psychology, there was a lot of dream analysis. Right? We shouldn't be doing that anymore. But the idea was that you would go in, you would tell a therapist your dreams, and the therapist would tell you what your dreams meant. What? That's ridiculous. Right? That's absurd. There's only one person that could possibly have any understanding of what your dreams mean, and that's you. And I think metaphorically, this applies more broadly to the idea of therapy, right? You're going to come in and the idea that I can give you your tools or your meaning, I don't think is the case, right? I am going to get to know you. I am going to be curious about you. I am going to try to understand what you bring and what your meaning is and what your belief system is and how you want to desire to function and move forward. And hopefully I can be helpful with that. But yeah, don't let anybody tell you what your dreams mean. Right?
So, ironically enough, one of my most memorable teachers growing up was a math teacher. And I went to MTSU years ago and got my certification to teach. And I went back to my high school one day to basically see old friends, old teachers, that kind of thing. And I was, I guess, sophomore, junior at MTSU at the time. And I was sitting in the lunchroom with some friends, and my math teacher came in, and she said, "Todd, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm at MTSU." And she said, "Well, what's your major?" I said, "Education." And without thinking, she said, "Oh my God, you're not going to teach math, are you?" And that's a true statement. But Doug, you mentioned misconceptions. I think one of the greatest things that makes an educator great is knowing the phrase "me too." And that is, we are each, all four of us are sitting on this panel, but the truth is every person in this room has our own mess. We have our own stuff. There's things going through your mind right now that are preoccupying your thoughts. I'm not a therapist. I would be horrible as a therapist. I would get fired, okay? I cannot be a therapist, but I do know human nature, and I know that my own limitations. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at, and I know what I used to be good at that I'm not so much good at anymore. But it's, I think, part of this whole aspect of understanding who you are and what you deal with and what you perceive you're good at or what you're not good at is partly just knowing that we all have our own mess and that it's okay to have our own mess and to know that whatever situation you're going into, in my case, the stress, oddly enough, anyone who knows me personally knows Todd is a lifetime student. I have been in school my entire life to some degree or another. I have to say my doctorate about broke that. But I have been in school at some point, and yet school was never a comfortable situation for me. And it was because I can think back those few teachers throughout my life that I could identify with the most. And it was the ones probably, truthfully, according to the standards and that kind of thing, maybe weren't the most effective, but as a human being and someone who could raise up someone to a potential that he didn't even know he had in him, those are the people that got me to this day. And so embrace the mess. That's what I've learned to do.
Todd, I think one of the things you said there that might speak to if there's education majors in the room or teachers in the room is the work of Lev Vygotsky, right? That idea of scaffolding. And we often use this as a way to talk to teachers about how to teach building on other topics and to really grow that into a deep level of learning. But human scaffolding, right? Learning how to level up in my humanness, right? We need people like, if I had my way, my profession, no offense, Ben, my profession wouldn't exist, right? It would be a much better place if my profession didn't have to exist, and to empower ourselves to continue to lift people up. Like that quote you read, Katie, from your kindergarten teacher, that's a real teacher. That's a real educator. And to value, to see people in everything that you do. It's one of the things that we'll say in all of my classes. My students have to say, I will see people as people, right? You're not a means to an end. You're not a stepping stone for me. You're not a way for me to level up. You are a people, and I will see you as that. Right? So really finding those people in your life that have scaffolded you, they've changed all of our lives.
Building on that comment, Derek.
That's a really good joke, building on scaffolding.
I know. I've just been waiting. I was like, yes, I can use that joke.
Nailed it.
What could, people out here, you're thinking about your friends, you're thinking about your spouses, you're thinking about loved ones, you're thinking about people in the community, people that you work with. What could be some kind of things that you could do, when you see people that are struggling, that you could give them support, that, that they want to know, or what they feel? How do we build that scaffolding? And on the other side, what worked for you? What helped you, for people to kind of build that bridge, so to speak, so that you got better?
Ben said his favorite tool was mindfulness. So my answer will be to steal his before he can hit the talk button and say, slow down. Slow down when you're living and see people, right? Something that we'll say a lot as therapists is a little bit of V&A, validation and affirmation. If you're in the room and you're married, validation affirmation is like the entire schema of marriage therapy. I see you, that's validation. I'm with you, that's affirmation. And when you think you validated all you can, affirm. And when you think you're done affirming, switch back to validating. So V&A all day long. But in order to do that, we have to look up and see people, right? So slowing down would be the way that I would say that.
Something that I think more people feel than we realize is a lot of us feel alone. And obviously here today we've learned that we're not. But when you feel so alone, it's really important that you have connections with people, even if they're very small. So even if you just go out of your way to compliment somebody, like, oh, I love your dress. It's so pretty. It is so pretty, Dr. Simone. She's gorgeous today. But just even if it's a stranger, if you can offer them a compliment, you've made a connection with somebody. And that makes you feel good about yourself, and it makes them feel good. And so you could inadvertently be helping people like you don't even realize. So that's one thing, I think, making connections even with just strangers, that really helps.
I'll second those two things. I think connection is probably the most profound way. I think to Derek's point earlier, where community structures exists and where that connection is, less therapists are often needed. Hopefully still some. But I think I might caution one thing, though. I think that I agree with everything that's said. I think sometimes the way we interpret this, though, can be a little bit difficult. I think I might speak briefly to psychology majors and people who are in the science or who are learning or who are developing. And when you're talking with your friends or you see your friends struggling, right, it seems like there's actually a pretty fine line between connection and judgment. That can be sometimes hard to balance. Telling people what they should do might feel like you're trying to help, but I would suggest that's more about you than it is about them. Empathy is meeting people where they are. Sympathy is being above them and looking down. Empathy is going to be the better tool in that moment, I think.
All right. Let me bring up a taboo subject. Okay. because you say it and people lose their mind. They go, we're not supposed to talk about it. But let's talk seriously. Let's talk a little bit from the clinical side. Let's talk about suicide, suicidal ideations. I have a lot of times people will come to me and they'll go, well, someone said something to me, and I just ignore it, we're not supposed to ignore it. We're supposed to talk about it. And I think that we have these it's a taboo and we shouldn't talk about it. And I think a lot of people out here that's hear about with anxiety and especially with depression, that might be something that they hear or they might think in their lives. What would you advise for them and for those around them and to the audience today?
Avoid avoidance at all costs. Suicide becomes like Bruno. Don't talk about Bruno, right? There's nothing off limits. There's nothing too raw, too real, too scary. Let's talk about it. And any of my students know, if you have someone in your life who you worry is going to end theirs, and you don't want to talk to them, call me and I'll cold call them. And every semester I typically have one of those phone calls. I'm professionally awkward. I mean, look at me, for crying out loud. Like, it doesn't get any better, right? So, like, if I'm going to have to ask you hard questions, that's fine. So one of those myths are, if you ask somebody if they're suicidal, you're giving them the idea. And that's, to borrow an old term, that's poppycock. Like, that doesn't make any sense. That's ridiculous. You're not going to put that idea into someone, but you might be letting them know that topic's not off bounds. So in a finitist culture, the most common response is, no, I'm fine. And what I would encourage you to do is then follow that up. I'm glad to hear that, but you don't seem it, and I'm worried, right? Just let it be awkward. Awkward is okay, and younger generations really struggle with awkward. Psych students have to sell pumpkins every fall because I want them to feel awkward, and that doesn't sound like a big deal, but truly, if you can sell someone a pumpkin and you recognize that they're just saying no to the pumpkin and not your existence, then you can ask someone if they're suicidal. I'm putting myself out there, so that's a weird gap between GORD and suicide, but
You did it well.
Ben?
Again, fully agreed with Derek. I would add quickly, though, something about normalization here. To Derek's point, nothing's off limits. I specifically talk about there is no such thing as thoughts that are off limits. Thoughts are super interesting to me. I think about them all the time. I would even challenge you guys to try to define what a thought is. It gets tricky, as it turns out. But thoughts of suicide are actually extremely normal. Now, there is a range, right, between like having the thoughts, fusing to the thoughts, making plans, and so forth, right? And I won't do the hand-raising thing today, because this does get pretty sensitive. But everybody, 100%, have had some thoughts about suicide at some point in their life. And if you haven't until now, you are now, because we're talking about it, and that's how brains work. So I think some normalization of this is an important thing. It doesn't need to be a taboo. It is, and I acknowledge that. I know it's uncomfortable to talk about, right? But it is extremely normal to have thoughts like these. It is extremely normal for the brain to consider such thoughts when we're experiencing mood disorders, for example. It's also extremely normal to experience them when you're not. So I like the normalization process. I will add quickly, right, anything you can do to just be there with a person, walk through hell, as Derek suggested, right? It turns out usually you don't actually literally have to walk through hell. It won't be as bad as your brain's worried about, just being with the person in that moment. And then, yeah, if they have any interest in connecting to resources such as a therapist, just letting them know you'll go with them, perhaps, right? Could be a helpful strategy in those moments.
I had a grad professor here who said 95% of people will admit to having had a suicidal ideation. 5% of people lie if you've asked them if they've ever had a suicidal ideation. But that scale is huge. And I can guarantee there's probably, I will guarantee there's at least one person here today who, when Ben says completely normal, your first thought is, thank goodness. Because it's one of those things we just hold close and we attempt to think about not thinking about it. And it doesn't work, right? So, yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Let me ask this question to you all. If someone here today was actually struggling, they've come, they've heard you talk, and they're like, oh, this sounds like something I have. What if they're struggling with anxiety and depression, what would you say to them today? What would your advice be to them today?
First, I would say, awesome. Like, great job for being willing to be vulnerable in that way, to be willing to give space for that thought today. Awesome. How can I help? And really, that's where it's at. If you're a tech student, I know I say this to my students all the time. Some of them are here. They'll back me up on this. If you're a tech student, you have already paid for counseling services. It's not like they're free. You paid for them already. You've already bought the Kia. The title is in your name. Go get the keys and drive that thing off the lot. You've paid for it already. It's open to you. Let's go get help. If you're here and you're not a tech student, man, the availability we have now for phone calls, telehealth, in person, showing up to your local emergency department. I mean, the things that we have available, awesome for being willing to admit it. Now what? Let's do something about it.
Yeah, and I would add, don't feel like you have to get it right or perfect. Anything worth doing is worth doing imperfectly. There's so many things available right now. Some of them better than others, I'm sure, right? But even as your first start is some online program or some online therapy that's available. These are great options that are affordable, that I wouldn't shy people away from. Even if it is imperfect, that's fine. Anything worth doing is worth doing imperfectly. Something is better than nothing, okay? And second from that, from sort of a different perspective, be curious about yourself. Be curious about what's going on with you. You heard me earlier in my talk. I love the triangle. I talk about the triangle all the time. People that know me get sick of me talking about the triangle, right? But again, if you can be curious with yourself, you know how you're feeling usually. That is going to be the most apparent thing. Can you take a step back and try to put together what thoughts are happening, what thoughts you're fusing to, what thoughts you're believing, what behaviors are then reinforcing those thoughts and those feelings in that moment? If you can do that, you might be able to see a way out. It might be an imperfect way out. It might not happen all at once, right? But anything worth doing is worth doing imperfectly.
I think a lot of people, we look to others to bring us out of that pit of depression, or we might seek somebody else to help us to get us out of it. But it's important to know that you have to make the steps yourself. It's not just going to happen. You're not just going to go up to someone and help me, save me. You have to save yourself and make those steps. So I would encourage you to read a self-help book, go to therapy, watch the videos, read the infographics, gather as much knowledge if that helps you feel better, and get on that bus, even if you have those monsters and things that you feel are holding you back, because what's going to happen? What's the worst thing that could happen if you start to seek help? You get tools to help you. You learn strategies to help you. You work toward getting better. There really isn't anything that can go wrong by taking those steps to getting better. You'll just find that one day your progress has grown a little bit. So that would be my suggestion.
I noticed that the theme, when I lecture in my class and we talk about psychological disorders, and then we go into counseling and treatment, I always end with the thought to them, the hardest thing that you can do is you just finally go, okay, I gotta get some help. And then I said, then you go, well, if I ask for help, I don't know if I'm gonna get it. I don't know. But that's not true, because that's what we're here for. And even there's someone there for that support. There's someone there that's going to go with you on that walk and on that journey to help you, because that's what we want. You know, it would be great. I know it's terrible to say, and Derek was right. It'd be great if we didn't really have a career. But it would be nice. We kind of want to work ourselves out of a career, because we want you to have the same life and the same joys and everything as everybody else. And I think that's an important thing. And when I'm hearing all this and hearing it from everybody else's side, is that once you make that step, you realize you have those small victories. You know, and like you said, the story about, well, now I go into the store and I realize it's not as bad as it was. And you just had to be willing to take those steps and know that you have a support system and everybody's here. And I also tell them too, Derek, in class, that yes, we have a counseling center. Shout out to them today. They're on campus, and you can make appointments and go see them. You know, and a lot of times we'll be like, well, I don't want to, but they're there for you. Okay? They're there for you. We're about to run out of time. I can't believe it. I'm going to let each one of you give you a couple minutes. Here's your final question. What do you want to leave with everybody here today? What is your final thoughts that you want the people that are sitting in the audience, the friends, the families, everyone, the people that are watching us live, the people that will watch this video later, years from now, what do you want to leave them with? What's your final thoughts on this topic, anxiety and depression?
It is easier to act your way into better thinking than it is to think your way into action. I think this is something that's seen across multiple aspects of this discussion, not the least of which is some therapy. I love how Doug mentioned, right, I very much want to work my way out of a job. I tell all of my clients this, right? My goal is not to keep you as a client. My goal is to get you out of here and get you to a place where you no longer feel like I can be helpful. And so I do not spend years with my clients talking and talking. Instead, I acknowledge and validate what my clients are feeling. I provide them the support, and I encourage them to take action. So that is my final thought. It is easier to act your way into better thinking than it is to think your way into acting.
Well, I'm the least qualified, I think, to offer advice, so I'm not going to offer advice. But one thing I can tell you is, my wife can attest to this, next to my own personal faith journey, dealing with anxiety head-on has transformed my life. The things that I used to normalize and think that were just a part of my everyday life, as a child and up through my middle and adult years, has become a thing of the past for the most part. Occasionally they surface, and I think you've learned me now. I'm an open book to a fault sometimes, but they surface occasionally in situations like this. And situations like this didn't used to rock me at all. In fact, I embraced them. And I'm learning as I'm sitting here before you of the effects of what this can have on a person's life. And believe it or not, Jackie, I am okay with it. I am more than okay with it, because it's part of it. It's part of the step.
So to those of you that are experiencing anxiety and depression, allow yourself to feel those things, understand that they're normal and that you're not alone. And I encourage you to search for that evidence. When you tell yourself, I'm not good enough, I'll never be good enough, I can't do this, these things are scary, this is going to happen. Prove yourself wrong, because it is so rewarding. I've come so far just by just those little wins, those small victories, proving myself wrong. So that would be my suggestion to you. And to those of you who have loved ones who are going through those things, or you're an educator and you have students going through that, just because you may not experience it and you may not understand, doesn't mean that you can't have compassion and show grace and show empathy to those people.
Like Dr. Schultz, I'm a man of a faith system, and I would never ask that you belong to my faith system, but in my particular belief, we have a book of writings from James, and it starts by saying, count it a blessing when you experience trials and tribulations, because you're being made perfect. The word that we actually translate for that being made perfect part is the word dokimian. Dokimian is the process of melting gold to where the impurities float to the top and it is scraped off. But melting hurts. and that's why it's a blessing. If what I would want to leave you with is the same thing I try to instill in my children. You can do hard things. Really, really hard things. And the result of doing hard things isn't likely to result in disorder. It's likely to result in growth. And those pains and that willingness to struggle to melt you down so the impurities can be raked off the top. Doing hard things is something I would encourage all of you to do every day. And that would be the best I could hope.
Thank you so much. Before I wrap up, I just want to again say a special thanks to our two counselors. If anything, you've told me that I really am not a good counselor. Also, I want you to, for a moment, think about this. You have anxiety or social anxiety, and then all of a sudden someone asks you, can you come and speak in front of a large group of people, and they're going to ask you questions that you will not know what they are ahead of time. I think that they have done an excellent job. The whole panel has done a wonderful job. Why don't we give them a round of applause? I guess the final thing I want to leave with you is what I leave with my classes. And it's kind of the same thing and the theme that has been said here. I usually start my class off with a quote from a man by the name of Karl Popper. And his quote is this: true ignorance is not the absence of knowledge, but it's the failure to acquire it. And what that means is that everyone here today, you wanted to know more. You wanted to know more about depression. You wanted to know more about anxiety. You wanted to know more about how this affects me in real life. How can I get help? You seek that out and you acquired that. And in the reality, that's what Mad Topics is about. It's about shining that light on these topics so that the community, loved ones, students, everybody else can acquire that knowledge. And that can only help us to be better. And the last thing I always tell my students, I tell them this a couple of times during the semester, this will be the last thing I tell, is that support is the best thing. And I look at all of them and I say, I tell you what, you might not hear it from anybody else, but I will tell you this today, and I mean it. I believe in you. I believe in you, and I will support you. And sometimes that's all we need to know, and that's all we need to hear to get through this life. And you can bank on that. So, once again, thank you all so much. You've been a wonderful panel. Dr. Kinsey Simone, I'm being death threat. Do not forget, she got up this morning and she's like, Doug, you're such a wonderful person. I love you to death. And that's like, serve me. please do the survey. At least 30 people, or else she'll kill me, and that's not a joke. Please fill it out. It's how we get ideas. We want to better serve the community and everything and everyone here. It means a lot to us. Is there anything else? Are you sure? All right. Thank you all again. We appreciate y'all coming. We'll see you around.